Hello everyone, today we continue learning Python and today I'll show you why import all, select all and all of these things are much worse than they could be. So let's start. First of all, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, I'm talking about from something, in our case module, import all. Why is that bad? Well, there are a lot of reasons and today I'll explain some of them. And I'll talk about select all from table in SQL a little bit. But let's start from module import all. But first of all, let me delete all of my redundant things. So I'll delete that and that and that. Okay, so now let's start. So as you can see, I have two files, main.py and module.py. And we'll work in main.py, and you can think of it as a user who I am a user in main.py who uses module.py that I or other people wrote as a library, for example. Okay, and there we have three functions: add, div, and debug. And by the way, that works not only with functions, but with every object in Python, with variables, with, I don't know, classes, objects, and so on. So what do we need to do? I'm writing a program that will, for example, add two numbers and show their division result. How we can do it? For module import all, let's do it with print sum, first of all, 1, 2, and then divide 1, 2. Let's run it. As you can see, our program works. But what's the problem with our program now? There are a lot of problems that I can think of, but 2 or 3 or even 4 main problems are contained in that line. So what's the first problem? The first problem is that I don't even know where my add and divide functions are. Because there are a lot of add, divide, and other functions in Python that are called like add, div, and so on. For example, we have operator module. From operator, let's go inside of it, and as you can see, we have the same function add that does exactly the same. And what if I have a lot of imports in my program? For example, if you worked with actually anything, if you worked with any big project on any big project, then you know that there are a lot of imports in even one file. And from module import all does not say anything like from module import all. So okay, so what do I import right now? I import add and divide. Okay, I may know it because I wrote my module. But what if another programmer sits on that program and does not understand what's even happening? Because what I can do is from math import all, from other things import all, and where is my add, where is my divide, where are other things? So what am I even doing? That's the first problem. So you don't even understand what's inside of that module. And if I did not show you like my module.py file, but I imported everything with add, div, and debug, then you would know that, okay, so that module file at least contains add and divide, and they can be functions, variables, but then you look down and you see, okay, these are probably functions because we call them, and you know that module contains add and divide. That's much more descriptive than just using a star instead of that. So use add, divide, or if you don't want to name all the functions that you're using, for example, you use 50 functions from only one file, from math module, for example, what you can do is just use import module. And then that is even much more descriptive. So for example, you're using module.add, module.divide. And what's even better, so much more descriptive because you really say what module are you using when you're calling a function. What's much more descriptive is when you use operator, or for example, you use another module with the similar function names. For example, operator, yes? So let's go inside of it, and as you can see, we have add here and add in operator. But since I'm using that import syntax, what I can do is use operator.add, and there will be no errors. There will be no misconceptions because I'm really using that specific function from that specific module. That's why using just raw imports, or if you don't want to write module every time you use a function, then just using from module import something, import in our case add. Okay, that's much better than using just a star. But that's not the only problem. That was the first problem, it's much more descriptive. So star does not tell you anything. But what's worse is what if we have some functions for debugging. For example, when I wrote that module or another programmer wrote that module, he or she needed some tool for debugging. And they used the debug function. So for example, when you call debug function, it will show you all the variables, all the paths, all the users, so everything about your program. In our case, you can think of Django or Flask. When you're using debug, you can literally see you can literally see everything. You can see why that error happened, what's the traceback of that error, where that error happened, where are my files, what are the settings of my project. You can see anything about your project. And what if some hacker will look for my debug information, because it's very useful for them. And since I'm using from module import all, I can just literally write debug, because that function can be called anything like start debugging option or start anything. And since I don't know that I import that function from my module right here, I can cause a lot of problems for my program, for my company, and for my team in the future, because I cannot fully understand what that function does, because if my library is enormous, the library that I'm using is enormous, then I need time to go in the source code and see what that function does. But I don't know that where that function is, so from what module I imported that function. I don't know that information because I imported it with wildcard, so with the star. And because of that, what I can do is I can write a simple program and, for example, call debug function for some reason. I don't know why, for some reason, I just forgot about it. And then, after that, I can cause some serious problems. For example, I will write a normal program, sum, or add 1, 2, let's run it. So as you can see, debugging is on. It cannot print that message. For example, it can just literally say nothing. But for example, put debug variable as true, like that. And that's where errors happen. For example, you can see the users of your system that your program actually uses. For example, now I'm on user Andrew, and because of that, after the debug line, I can see my user, for example, or I can see my passwords, I can see my keys, because debug mode is for development only. And in development, it's pretty useful that you can see like all of your settings, all of your tracebacks in one simple panel, in debug panel. But when we're talking about production, we can literally run that debug module and forget about it. But the problem is that our debugging will still be on. And again, we cannot, our module, our library, our framework cannot print that debugging is on. A lot of them do, but some of them may just use debug equals true. Like that. So just reassign the variable that says that debugging is on or off. And that's where errors happen, because after that line, anything can happen. My information can be stolen, my keys can be stolen, my server can be shut down, anything. And what's the worst part is that we don't even know where the debug function is coming from. For example, we can debug our database. We can debug our cache database. We can debug anything, our server. Again, anything, but I don't know where that debug function is coming from because I used wildcard. But if I'm using debug right here, at least now I can see, okay, so my debug function is coming from module, and maybe it's not that great to run that debug function, so okay, let me read about it. So I know that at least my debug function is imported from my module, and I'll read about it, at least. Or even I'll delete it if I know what that function does. But now I can see that my debug function is imported from that module, because I don't use wildcard that says nothing about my program. I use the real names of my modules. And what's even better, again, if we're talking about readability, is using from import module and now module.debug. As you can see now, I'm literally using .debug in here. Like I can see that, okay, that debug is for that module. Maybe I should turn it off. That's how it works. and again module.add. That's much more descriptive, but again, it can be a disaster if you have like module .a, .b, .c, .d, and so on. So in a lot of cases, you can use module.debug and module.function, module.class, but again, it can be a disaster, and you need to get readability in the account, because that's how it works. Your code should be clear, should be clean for other programmers. Okay, so now from module import something. That's how it works. We do not use wildcard or star by these two reasons. First of all, it's not descriptive at all, and second of all, we can import some serious functions that we don't need to. But what if you are writing a module and you need to, for example, forbid that wildcard? So you only want your users to write from module import A, B, C, but you don't want your users to ever write from module import O. What you can do is, let's first of all remove that module prefix. What you can do is use O list in Python. So what is that list? It can be defined in any file in Python, in any library, in anywhere actually. But that list shows you public objects of your module. So now, if my list is empty, what does that mean? That means that public objects of my module, there are no public objects of my module. So there are no, again, public objects that I can import with wildcard. If there are no public objects in my module, then debug and add will not be imported because they are not in that O list. That means that I cannot ever use wildcard. Actually, I can do it, but it will not return anything. And that from module import O becomes useless because, again, my O list is empty. But what if you want your users to use wildcard, but you don't want them to import functions like debug and other functions that only your program and your library should use, like internal functions, internal classes, and so on? Then, of course, you can just write the names of the functions, variables, classes, anything that you want your users to use. So now, add and divide functions will be public because they are in O list, and that's how it works. Now, as you can see, from module import O, my add function works, but my debug function is in red, so it's not found because there is no such function in O module. And when I'm using from module import O, I only import objects that are in my O list, so only my public objects. But of course, still I can import it with from module import debug, add, and so on. But as you can see now, by the way, another plus using that O is that you have your not unused import statement, but debug. As you can see now, it's underlined and it says debug is not declared in O. So that means that debug is not a public class, object, variable, or anything. So yeah, that's just greater. So when you're writing your own modules, use O. That's kind of useful. And that's how it works. So again, if you don't want your users to use from module import O, then just assign O as nothing. But of course, there is another drawback. So if you're using O as an empty list, then even if you import from module import add, for example, as you can see now, add is not declared in O. So that means that your users will see that error. But of course, it's better to just write the names of the objects that you want to use as public ones. For example, add and divide in our case. And we can easily import them with O or with from module import add. But still can import other things from our module if we give their names. But wildcard is not as bad or harmful as it was, because now we don't use debug functions, debug classes, and other internal things from our module. That's how it works. But of course, there are another errors, like we import redundant things. For example, returning to the operator from operator import O. Do you know how many functions there are in operator? As you can see, there are a lot of functions. By the way, there is O, so they assign O, but still, that list is enormous. And imagine that you import all of these things to your Python code. That's a big list, and probably you don't need all of them. It will not hurt your your program speed because our computers are very powerful today, but still, if you're using from operator import of, you import redundant things, and that's not what you want. Okay, and by the way, it's better to use import if you want to use a lot of functions, and again, better to use import operator, because now you literally use only the functions that you need, first of all, but then you use these functions as, so you really say that I want to use for div from the operator. That's just better. Okay, though, so these are three main problems with the import all or import module from module import all in Python. So the first one is that we import redundant things, like there can be a lot of functions, classes, and that's not a great idea for your project to import all of them. Second of all, that we can import some internal things that we don't need, like we can import, I don't know, debug functions, debug classes. We can import some, again, internal functions that will not properly work in our code. They only work inside of that module, and we can import some useless things to our code. These are the first two problems, and the last one is that it's just not descriptive at all. So if we're using from operator import all, what do I import? I import alls. Okay, so what's all? What is it? I don't know, and that's why it's not a great idea to use all. So yeah, that's it. And by the way, if you don't want to use all, but still want to mark your functions classes as internal ones, then of course use underscore and double underscore before the name of your function. Let's go to the main.py and I'll show you that even if we use from module import all, we don't have any all list in here, but from module import all with wildcard, then as you can see, I cannot use debug because that function is marked as an internal one because we start with the underscore. And if you don't know, in Python, underscore before the name of the function indicates that your function is an internal one, so it's protected, it should not be used anywhere outside that module, class, and so on. So that's why you should not use wildcard, and I think that was very useful for you. But now let's talk about another thing, which is select all from table. Why is that bad in SQL? So I think that you already know the answer. We get a lot of data, like the data that we don't even need. For example, you have your users table and you say select all from users, and your users have ID, username, or ID, not like that, ID, username, I don't know, surname, then created date, then another date like is online. So there are a lot of fields in your SQL database. And by the way, if you don't know SQL, just think of it as an Excel spreadsheet. So you get a lot of information and you might return it to the user. And in some systems, you pay for the amount of time that your queries have been executing for. So for example, if your query has been executing for 1 second, then you pay for 1 second only. But if your query has been executing for 2 seconds, then you pay for these 2 seconds. And what's bad is that select all from users is a very like very hard query to execute. It will be, for example, if you use select ID and username, your query will be executing for 0.5 seconds. But if you're using select all from username, then your query will be executing for, I don't know, let me say 10 seconds. And imagine that you pay not for 0.5 seconds, but for 10 seconds. And now multiply that number by, I don't know, 10,000. That's the amount that you pay for. So that, or multiply 0.5 by 10,000. I think you can see the difference between both of them. So that's why you should never use select all from users. It will not, from import will not overwhelm your system when you import other redundant things, but select all will. And actually, the reasons why you should not use select all are pretty similar to the ones with import all in Python code. So select all is bad because it's not very descriptive. I don't know now what's inside of my users module, but if users table, but if I use ID, username, surname, that I know that at least these columns exist. Second of all, we get a lot of data that we probably don't need to use. And third of all, it's just not descriptive at all. So what are we importing from here? So what we selecting, extracting from our database, from our table? I don't know. So that's why I should never use select all from something and from module import all. So yeah, that's everything I wanted to tell you today. That video is kind of long for that topic, but thank you for watching and good luck.